participating in the development of consensus-based standards leverages your opportunities and leverages what you know to ensure that your product, good or service, and ultimately your bottom line, red or black, is optimized in your best interest.
Welcome to the Regulating AI podcast with Sanjay Puri. AI is changing the world faster than rules can keep up. So how do we protect people without killing progress? Each week, Sanjay brings you inside conversations with global leaders, policymakers, and innovators who are wrestling with that exact question. So if you're curious about the future of technology and how it's governed, you're in the right place. Joining us today on the podcast is Dr. James H. Dickerson, Director of ASCET Center of Excellence. He's at the forefront of shaping standards for critical and emerging technologies, helping bridge the gap between scientific innovation and real-world regulation.
Dr. Dickerson, welcome to Regulating AI.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm really happy to chat with you today.
Dr. Dickerson, we have a global audience. Our audience is made up of policymakers here, globally, their staff, and as well as entrepreneurs, etc. And so let's just set the stage a little bit. Tell them a little bit to our listeners about your remarkable journey from material science to consumer advocacy to now leading AI standards. And then also about the ASCET Center, which launched with a $15 million from NIST some months ago. What is that center and what are your first 100-day priority lists for established U.S. leadership and governance?
So I'm a physicist by training. As you mentioned, my PhD is in semiconductor optics from Stony Brook University, formerly known as the State University of New York at Stony Brook. After doing a postdoc in organic nanomaterials, I was fortunate to join Vanderbilt University in nanoscience in the physics department, physics and astronomy department, pursuing interests in nanomaterials, magnetic and optical properties of rare earth-based nanomaterials, as well as a niche area called electrophoretic deposition, which is an industrially favorable technique to assemble nanostructures into thin films, coatings, things like that. I pursued the tenure track, which is typical. I was very fortunate to earn tenure, both in physics and then subsequently in the chemistry department, because of much of the materials chemistry that I did to make the nanomaterials that I ended up studying in physics. Thereafter, in that journey, which actually started before graduate school, as a high school teacher, I went on to Brookhaven National Lab, where I continued this theme that you'll see, which is trying to communicate science, try to communicate information effectively to different recipients, different stakeholders, different individuals. I did that in the academic world. At Brookhaven National Lab, I was able to do that to subject matter experts. I did that at Vanderbilt too, but certainly subject matter experts and more businesses to try to help them understand their own technologies and look at translation of those technologies into truly tangible things that ultimately might end up on your shelves. Asset director, doing very much the same thing, but slightly different lens, slightly different context, slightly different recipients, but really trying to do the same thing, giving people information, actionable information in ways that allow them to make really informed decisions about their businesses, about their discourse with the ecosystems that we hope to address really with society.
Just a little bit about ASCET. Especially for our listeners who might not be in the United States, just what is ASCET, its role, and its immediate goals?
So ASCET is an acronym that stands for Advancing Standardization for Critical and Emerging Technologies. This effort for ASCET and its Center of Excellence uh, originated from the previous US administration and has been supported by the current administration to bring forth a variety of things, workforce development, uh, invigorating the economic base, and really providing a hub, if you will, to facilitate those standardization, pre-standardization, and the implementation of standards in industry, so industrialization of standards for US domiciled, US based firms, so that US has strength and competitive advantage in these critical emerging technologies. So the critical emerging technologies upon which we are focusing, number 4, AI is one of them, leading the charge. Biotechnologies is another. Quantum technologies, that whole portfolio. And then semiconductors and microelectronics is the fourth.
Explaining technology to different stakeholders, communicating that. Tell our listeners, why is that important? Why should different stakeholders understand this?
So the nature of standards and standardization is extremely important for a few different stakeholder groups that I have envisioned, and we in the organization have envisioned. Certainly, industry is a primary stakeholder because standards help define the parameters, the constraints, the direction that innovation will necessarily progress that will affect what a company's own products, own services, own goods might end up becoming. And so having those stakeholders involved in our efforts will certainly drive innovation and hence drive commerce. Another stakeholder are the academy, academicians, and different types of academic environments, not just colleges and universities, but technical schools and other venues for which either early career, mid career, or even late career professionals who are involved in these industries, these critical and emerging technologies, can get involved in standards and standards development so that their own career can evolve and mature and strengthen, as well as their company's involvement in these standards help shape the directions that those companies will achieve. Another one, of course, is government. Government perhaps is more obvious in not only the development of standards, the practice of pre-standardization, doing the pre-research that's needed to understand where technologies will end up going, as well as the associated standard setting through consensus or otherwise, uh, as well as just being engaged with supporting the pursuits of academicians and certainly standard setting organizations, both individual organizations and consortia, as well as the standards in that subset, standards development organizations who their entire behavior and pursuit is ensuring that products, goods, and services, industry standards are what they need to drive growth and innovation. There are other stakeholders as well. Media for me is certainly one, as well as the general public being aware of what standards do for society and do for the growth of technologies that will impact their everyday lives.
Is there a specific activity that Aztec is doing towards media, or is that not one of the stakeholders that you look at?
So our primary stakeholders are industry, academia, government, and standard setting organizations. I say media as well because this is one of the tools that we'll employ to reach out and engage those stakeholders. So you have to have media, social media, traditional media, etc., as one of your partners in this endeavor, because dissemination, to my mind, is extremely critical. Getting support for those constituencies, if you will, is very important. There are traditional ways that the standards community have engaged. Those should be pursued most certainly. But I'm of the mind that if we expand this so that society is aware, more aware of what this essential community is doing to make people's lives better, there'll be a groundswell of support for our endeavors. And so that's part of the game plan as such.
Media is also now getting has changed with the new media. I mean, look at us, so to speak, talking to our constituency and many others, etc. So communicating and engaging with them also has to change because they become, in many cases, highly influential. I mean, they're influencers and all kinds of other folks, and to make sure that those also get engaged. So I think that's a important point that policymakers also need to think, because they are one of the means of engaging with our citizens and consumers. Dr. Dickerson. Dr. Dickerson, you have said standards are the engines of innovation. Now, we have a lot of entrepreneurs in our audience too, who say that this kind of challenges the general view that sometimes regulations can stifle innovation. Can you unpack this philosophy that you have for our audience who might be a little skeptical about this message you have?
If you envision as a founder, as an employee of an innovative AI firm, and you envision your trajectory. So I'm speaking to you, the listeners of this podcast. Envision that. If you understand not only the road along which you wish to travel upon in your journey, and you understand the constraints, perhaps unbeknownst to you, constraints that exist along that journey, you optimize your potential for success. Participating in the development of consensus-based standards leverages your opportunities and leverages what you know to ensure that your product, good or service, and ultimately your bottom line, red or black, is optimized in your best interest. That is a very selfish way to think about it, but that also addresses some of the concerns. If you can participate actively in the development of standards, it ultimately will lead to your the greater likelihood of your economic success. It is not the case that standards go against innovation. Standards drive innovation. And certainly your participation in standards will drive the innovations that you will experience. That is true, period.
Standards will drive innovation, as you said. So, one of our listeners who knew that you were coming in said uh, that premature standardization could slow down the AI advancement and put the US at a competitive disadvantage. How do you react to them?
So I don't think the appropriate argument is that premature standardization will necessarily suppress my innovation and hence my bottom line. And I'm not arguing that. I don't think anyone really is. What I would say is that the coupling of timely innovation and timely standards development in concert, in sequence, for individual organizations, as well as the ecosystem in that industry, certainly are synergistic and will self-promote. So the development of standards and the drive toward innovation, if working in partnership, will support each other. So I'm not suggesting in any way that, oh, let's impart standards and then hope that things happen. You have to do these in concert as innovation takes you in directions and trajectories that you may not have realized or predicted. That is certainly something that I've experienced as a nanoscientist. Directions of research and technology transfer may occur along paths that you would never ever predict, even a few moments before those discoveries and those new avenues are realized. I say in concert, not in parallel, because conceptually parallel endeavors don't imply that they're related to each other. They just happen to be parallel. See, two hands that are parallel don't interact. Whereas I'm positing that innovation and standards development are going in concert with each other. There are resonances among them that drive each of them, perhaps independently, but more likely in unison.
The White House had released the AI Action Plan, which talks about U.S. taking a leadership role in AI. Why does global leadership in standardization matter for U.S. competitiveness?
As US based companies engage not only with the domestic, quasi local marketplace, but engage with the global marketplace, if those organizations engage with standards that are truly global, the international standards, they not only will have a competitive advantage within the domestic sector, but will have a competitive advantage globally. So behaving in that way, engaging with international standards development, ensures that you have an understanding of this pathway that we spoke about a few moments ago that isn't just residing in the local sphere, but in fact extends around the world.
Paint for our listeners a picture of that alternative future. You talked about us leading in there. Let's say US is not leading in that, in the standard setting for AI. Well, what does it mean for these companies?
To me, there are multifold issues: a lack of participation, a lack of information gathering, and a lack of being at the forefront of your industry, of your technological area, so that you know what nooks and crannies, what changes in the direction and the flow of technology are occurring, leave you with fewer and fewer and fewer bits of information so that you can ensure that your company, your firm has a competitive advantage. To my mind, as a scientist, a dearth of information is like the worst place to be. And not engaging yourself, even at early days of a startup or early days of a small to medium-sized enterprise and its growth, and trying to establish milestones in revenue. You need to be aware of how the entirety of the flow of the stream of your technology is moving. The speed, the trajectory, and others that are involved in this space to remain not only relevant, but knowledgeable in setting forth in a driving sense rather than a passive sense what happens not only to your entity, your company, your firm, even more personally, you as a professional individual and your career growth, but how your field evolves.
So let's, just map the AI standards landscape for our listeners. We have the ISO, IEC, JTC, 1SC, I mean, God, 42, which handles the AI fundamentals. And then IEEE focuses on the technical specs. ITU, part of the UN, covers telecommunications AI. And now ASTM through ASCET. So, couple of questions for our listeners. How do we, prevent from having these becoming fiefdoms in itself? And how, if you're a small company, how do you kind of map these things? How do you figure out, uh, which standard should I follow? How should I do it? It can get pretty confusing. Just these acronyms will get confusing.
The thing to take away, the thing to keep in mind for our acronym, ASCET, is that we operate as a facilitator. We operate as a hub to engage, of course, our parent organization, ASTM, but the entirety of the collection of stakeholders, which are standard setting organizations. And so we envision very, very keenly engagements with those that you mentioned, ISO, IEEE, ANSI, others, IEC, uh, in this effort to address information sharing, workforce capacity, driving that forward, looking at the nature of standardization, pre-standardization, and even post-standardization, as well as trying to find what pilots might drive the innovation in partnership with the other stakeholders, but certainly looking to our partners within the SSO family to work with us. ASCET seeks to be the hub for which information can be shared among those constituencies, those stakeholders, and help all aspects of our critical and emerging technology ecosystems drive forward and achieve our goals.
Our entrepreneur listeners out there, how do you engage with them? And then I'll talk about the other stakeholders.
We have zero intent on being passive. I mean, we're not passive. We are very active in engaging people. So we have a website, ascet.com. We have a Join Us tab. We substantially welcome you, no uncertain terms, to reach out to us, to engage and have discussions with myself and with my team to talk about what your concerns are, what your aspirations are, your questions about, well, how can standards and standardization fit into my position as an early adopter of AI in my industry? Or how can I, as a startup, allocate time in this 100 200 hour week kind of situation, yet still find the opportunities to innovate and to be at the pulse of where standards might lead my area of AI. We are here to help, to facilitate, and be your partner. So please feel free to reach out. We will be happy to have those discussions. And certainly, if you are new to standards, or as a founder, or you're new to standards as someone who's mid-career and are looking for ways to continue to grow yourself as a professional, that is also part of what we're hoping to do.
Dr. Dickerson, now just talking a little bit about from moving from standards to regulation, where do you see the line between what standards can accomplish versus where we actually need government regulation? Where is that line for our listeners?
The US government does not de facto leap toward regulation as a first practice. They actually look to standards and standardization as a first approach toward uh, a particular industry. And so they will do that, and they do that in the AI space. So that's something to keep in mind. Regulation has its place. That adoption of standards into ordinances, laws, and statutes, that has its place, uh, particularly as certain industries uh, can mature or are maturing. To my earlier point of doing this in concert with companies that are innovating, that I think is the best way to envision as a firm, as a professional in AI. That is the best way to think about the relationship between standards and ultimately regulation. That standards will evolve, and your participation in standards will help your firm understand what the course will be and what course of action you should employ to ensure that you remain at a competitive advantage and perhaps even leading the industry, not only in your product, good, or service, but also leading in the development of standards. And then over time, evolution of regulation from federal, state, and local bodies will first try to look at standards for that implementation and ingestion. And then, as the case may be, we'll move toward more mandatory standards, i.e., regulation.
Dr. Dickerson, AI is moving probably faster than at least any technology that I have seen and most people have seen. And the AI landscape changes almost on a daily basis. So, how do you balance the need for speed with the need for thoroughness and standard development?
When I was a physicist doing research in phosphors, so that was my field, the light emitting devices. At the time, in the late 90s and early aughts, it was extremely rapidly advancing to the point where standards associated with phosphors were well established. And there was this growing area called organic light emitting diodes that was competitive. We kept our pulse on not only what was going on in our space, but what was going on in tangential and parallel spaces. And so that actually fed into the innovation that we were experiencing. And so I always view these types of situations where it looks like constraints are really pinning down innovation or pinning down one's ability to discover and find the next thing is actually the exact opposite. It's actually the opportunity, the perhaps once in a lifetime, sometimes opportunity to find what will be the solution that satisfies the questions that not only I'm asking, but the entirety of my competitive landscape is also trying to ask.
If that's a mission, do you think uh, standards that we are are looking at creating are going to help with promoting that and create some rules of global AI commerce, Dr. Dickerson?
Using standards to help your firm, your community understand what spaces can be pursued, explored, pushed upon, can only benefit you because you will have more information, more knowledge that you can input into your organization and your planning and your scheduling and your testing. that ultimately will lead into what other competitors, other participants globally see as being the space upon which they can work. And so if you're first, if you're early in setting, this is the landscape, this is the parameter space, to use a technical term, parameter space upon which you can work, you will be the first in that parameter space to help define it. And then others will have to react if they're swift, or they will lag behind if they're not so swift in that space, in that endeavor. So being first, assertion, and leading will always give you the advantage. If you're thinking about other types of business strategies, like your exit strategy, all of those are informed by your participation in establishing what that parameter space is, and that's where standards go in. So it all links in. If you are patient in thinking about the process and about the relationship between your company, your business, yourself as a participant in standards development, and what those standards activities are, it all loops back. It all loops back to having advantage, having market share, having black rather than red to your bottom line in your balance sheet.
We've had governors, attorney generals, etc. What is your message to them and their staff who are in many cases saying we need AI policy? Some say we don't want to go down the EU AI Act path. We don't want to over-regulate, etc.
It's something that I'm cognizant of, given my previous experiences in other industries, where there had to be a very delicate balance between driving policy forward and having that relationship to where industry existed, and then where the end users, the end user community existed. I say, as the director of ASCET, that part of our role is to ensure that federal and state policymakers are present in the conversation. It is, to my mind, absolutely necessary to have those entities, those constituencies, those stakeholders involved, so that not only can we help, we being ASCET, help in the conversation and the exchange of information, but we can also provide some insight into the connectivity between the development of policy, how it might impact industry, and how the cutting edge of the technology, which sometimes resides in industry, sometimes it resides in other parts of the government, sometimes it resides in academia, how there can be a nexus, a positive nexus of information and data sharing. That's what our information and data sharing hub that we're scaling up will do. It will provide a reservoir of information, from policy information, as well as standards and standard development information, as well as best practices in the development of standards, or even the development of standards that infuse policy.
Right. So I think to our policy leaders, Dr. Dickerson is extending an open hand. If you need information or any other resource, that's what they have, whether it's at the federal level or even at the state level. So that's great, and I think it's a great resource. So if we take nothing out of it, is that ASCET really serves as a great resource for policy levels at different stages. Should AI standards be mandatory rather than voluntary?
It depends. AI is so broad-reaching and so many different individual vertical industries that having a broad statement of yes or no most certainly will get into conflict. So I would argue that it very much depends on one's industrial vertical intersection, industry and insert industry here.
Can the private sector self-regulate AI effectively, yes or no?
Govern, I think that's definitely a possibility.
Is the US currently leading in global AI standards development, yes or no?
The US is a leader, most certainly.
Okay. Will China dominate AI standards if the US doesn't act aggressively?
If the US doesn't act, which it's not going to happen, if the US doesn't act, then others may end up dominating. But that's not going to happen. That's not happening now, and that won't happen in the future.
Should AI companies be required to test against standards before deployment?
So, to my mind, doing that test is absolutely necessary.
Can international AI standards keep pace with technological development in AI? Yes? No?
I think it's possible.
This goes to your background. Should consumer protection agencies have a role in AI technical standards?
Technical standards need all hands on deck.
Is the current standards development process too slow for AI?
I don't think so.
Okay. Should smaller companies get different AI standards than the big tech companies?
The size of a company isn't a metric to say, oh, you should get a certain standard versus another standard, in my opinion.
We really are at a fascinating inflection point, leading the US effort to shape global AI standards. While you're drawing upon your decades of experience protecting consumers from technical complexities that they don't need to understand, but your message that standards can be innovation engines rather than innovation brakes, I think offers a hopeful path forward for what's often portrayed really as a zero-sum game between safety and progress. So really, for our listeners who are shaping AI policy around the world, the work that Dr. Dickerson is doing at ASCET will ripple through every AI system deployed globally. We hope the standards are being written today in rooms most people have never heard or will determine. So, Dr. Dickerson, thank you for joining us on Regulating AI podcast, and thank you for taking on this critical work at such a pivotal moment. And for our listeners, if you please like this podcast, like, subscribe, and forward. We will have more on this series on standards and other great leaders like Dr. Dickerson. Thank you, Dr. Dickerson, for being on the podcast.
Sanjay, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really welcome engagement with the AI community and the Regulating AI community. Very much appreciated. I look forward to seeing you at an AI conference yet again, and looking forward to meeting your audience virtually and in person through ASCET's website, through the various workshops that ASCET will be undertaking in the near future. Look for Q4 workshop in AI, as well as calendar year 2026 workshops. And feel free to reach out to us at ASCET.com. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to the Regulating AI podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. Share it with someone curious about the future of AI, and join us next time for more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead. Right here on the Regulating AI podcast.